the Messiah who is to come throughout all this redemptive history will not only crush the head of the serpent, he will also reconstitute what a proper Son of God is to be, a proper son who is a prophet, priest, and king.
Welcome back to Mid-America Reformed Seminary's Roundtable Podcast, a broadcast where the faculty of Mid-America discuss everything from Reformed theology, cultural issues, and all things seminary. This is episode 63, and I'm your host, Jared Luchabor. Thanks for tuning in. Well, next week is Christmas, and we find ourselves in the season of Advent. Joining the podcast for the next 3 episodes are Old Testament professors Reverend Andrew Compton and Reverend Mark Vander Hart, who sit down to talk about Advent and the coming Savior, focusing today on Genesis and other Old Testament texts in the Pentateuch.
The incarnation, of course, what we celebrate at Christmas, the fact that Christ has come, the Word became flesh, and yet this wasn't something that came out of just anywhere. It has deep roots in the Old Testament, and that's what we decided to start out with today, is looking at these original Old Testament prophecies of the coming of Christ. The place, we really get this thing kicked off is, interestingly, in the midst of a number of curses given in Genesis 3. Here is the result of Adam and Eve's sin against the Lord, and the Lord shows up and immediately speaks to the serpent with very profound words. And he says in Genesis 3, verses 14 and 15, the Lord said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and the dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Well, what do we have going on here?
What stands out in my mind is, especially in verse 15, is the fact that it's a divine action that kicks off the antithesis. God says, "I will put enmity," which suggests there wasn't enmity between the two seeds. And if you would think about that, I suppose not, because when the woman and the man listened to the voice of the serpent, they had in fact become the servants of the serpent, and were following his dictates, and his word is now leading the way. And therefore, what follows in all of redemptive history is at least this: there's an element of enmity. But God has to do it. God has to insert it there. And furthermore, the verse speaks of the contestants, seed of the woman, seed of the serpent, which suggests a plurality. It suggests a plurality, a line of descendants and people on one side or the other. And it's not something that is biologically determined or nationally determined. It's a division that's spiritually determined, because the firstborn son of the woman, physically, Cain, turns out to be like his father, not only Adam in terms of dead in sins and trespasses, but like his father, the serpent, who was a murderer from the beginning, who was a liar from the beginning. And so physical descent is not essential here, but rather it's a spiritual difference. And so the contestants are two seeds, and the actions are conflict, namely, one will bruise the head of the other will bruise the heel of the other.
And that conflict that begins here really does get traced out through the rest of Scripture. It seems like from this moment on, we get a very pointed glimpse into what turns into the line of seed waging war against the line of the serpent. His seed, the serpent's seed or offspring. We see English translations handling it differently, but yes, this theme of seed, the Hebrew word zerah, is going to show up in very key places now throughout the remainder of the Pentateuch. But it's very, very much here is this one who will come from the woman, who's supposed to serve as who will serve in this destruction of the serpent. And it is interesting you mentioned Cain, because it seems to me that at Cain's birth, Eve seems to may even be hoping that this is coming true now. The seed has come. She says in 4 verse 1, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Here's the Lord being faithful now, giving this person. And yet, as you just mentioned, actually, we learn 1 John 3 verse 12, Cain is like his spiritual father, the devil. I find it interesting how that how these curses work out too, where the serpent is directly cursed, right? Cursed are you above all livestock. We find with the woman, with Eve, she'll have this pain, but no curse directly given to her, at least predicated explicitly of her. Whereas with Adam, it's interesting how cursed is the ground because of you. What's interesting, though, is here comes Cain now, this potential seed rival, this potential seed victor, and these two things are kind of brought together in 4 verse 11. And now you, which really echoes that address to the serpent, cursed are you. Now you are cursed from the ground. So it's interesting how that pulls together, these all the negative things going on in the curse section, showing ultimately that Cain fails. And so we sit at this point, recognizing that a seed will come, and yet not finding it in Cain. Certainly, we don't end up finding it in Abel, who was killed by Cain. But maybe with Seth. And the story really kicks off from here as we begin to see this develop through the rest of Genesis.
Yeah, the word offspring or seed will become increasingly unpacked in redemptive history. This story, that history, that portion of God's plan is all adding to the great picture, the great mosaic of what the Messiah will be. And what he will be is a reconstitution of the first Adam. The first Adam is, we speak of Christ as prophet, priest, and king, a threefold office. And Adam in the Garden of Eden was already that. He had received God's word, for God gave him his word. Therefore, he has the knowledge of God's mind and God's will. That's what a prophet deals with. He was without sin, therefore he was holy, which is what a priest is concerned with, guarding the precincts of God's shrine, God's home, keeping all unfit and impure and unholy things out. And clearly Genesis 1 says that the first man was king. He was to rule over the birds, the fish, and the other creatures of God's creation. And so the Messiah who is to come throughout all this redemptive history will not only crush the head of the serpent, he will also reconstitute what a proper son of God is to be, a proper son who is a prophet, priest, and king. And therefore all of the various offices that Israel has, she had kings, she had priests, prophets would arise, are God's way of sketching and outlining, should we say, recapturing in a way what the first Adam was, but painting a picture that's looking forward to the final incarnation of Christ.
We can even move forward into the patriarchs with seems like quite a big jump, but with Abraham we have such a significant movement happening now with this narrowing down to this one family, and the covenant promises given to him. But striking are the words in Genesis 22, verses 17 and 18, where after Abraham has has obediently presented his son Isaac as an offering to God to be sacrificed unto him, and totally perplexed as to how this is going to work out, although Hebrews, the book of Hebrews in the New Testament suggesting that he had confidence that God could even raise Isaac from the dead. But after this whole event, and after he realizes he does not have to sacrifice his son, God says, starting at 22 verse 16, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring, your seed, shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. There's really almost a chiastic balance there, blessing and offspring and blessing, kind of a back and forth element that we see. But here, now we have the role, the seed being described as the one who will possess the gate of his enemies. Again, this military language being brought back in. He will be victor. And how striking then that Paul, in Galatians 3:16, even looks back on this event. It's now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring, his seed. This is here's the Greek drawing upon the Old Testament, but the equivalent words here, Greek and Hebrew for seed. It does not say and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ, Paul says.
Paul is picking up on the fact that the word for offspring or seed is singular in form, but it can have a plural or multiple sense, as we sometimes use the word police. Many police arrived, or I caught many fish. Singular in form, but plural in sense. And the Galatians passage, therefore, Paul is using that idea. It's not to seeds as to many, but it's to one, Christ. And yet later on in that same passage, all those who believe in Jesus Christ are the seed, plural, of Abraham. In other words, in the Messiah, the one and the many are contemplated, but it has to go through the one. The success of God's redemptive plan rests on only one. But because of the success of Christ, many are blessed. That goes back to something else in Genesis. Through you, all the nations or all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, I think that brings out another dimension of the Messiah. On the one hand, he engages and leads the antithesis, the fight against the devil and his seed. But Genesis 12 also indicates that another role of the Messiah is to be the source of blessing. And, when you come to the New Testament then, Christ proclaimed the coming of the kingdom. He taught what the nature of the kingdom was, but then he also brought blessing to people by healing, feeding, bringing back to life, restoring some of the horrific damage that sin and Satan have caused in this world.
Yeah, and how blessing and victory are coming together even here in Genesis 22. Again, possessing the gate of his enemies, and in your seed singular, shall all the earth be blessed. And it is even there earlier in the verse, right? I will multiply your seed, singular, as the stars of heaven. That draws exactly on that singular plural thing you were just getting at. And it almost reads in a funny way, that for them to talk about multiplying a singular as the stars of heaven, what is this, cloning or something going on? But rather here, look how it keeps that singular in view the whole time. It never allows the collective. It never allows the multitude to become untethered from this singular figure who will be that agent, singular, of blessing. I think that's what Paul is getting at. I don't think Paul is doing the rabbinic thing of just punning on a single word. I think he's rightly perceiving the significance of that singular seed as it echoes back to Genesis 3.
Another dimension, speaking of possessing the gates of the enemies, something of the nature of the Messianic kingdom, I think, is sketched for us also in Genesis 49. In Genesis 49, we have the patriarchal blessing upon his sons, the various tribes of Israel. Mm-hmm. And if you read through that section, every tribe gets, or every son gets words addressed to him. However, if you really want to search for the words that really flesh out blessing, really only two sons get that, Joseph and Judah. But I draw your attention to what is said about Judah in Genesis 49, 8 and following. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. There's that victor over enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness who dares rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, scepter, of course, being a royal symbol, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Now, something of the nature of the kingdom here is that in conquering his enemies, he is a lion and he possesses the scepter. He actually brings peace to them and prosperity. Milk, wine, those are all symbols of riches and bounty. And the ESV translates, until tribute comes to him. Personally, I like a different translation, namely, until he comes to whom it belongs. Until he comes to whom it belongs. In other words, Judah and the line of Judah will be the line of the Messiah, and the royal dimension of the second Adam belongs to that tribal line until he comes, and that will be the Messiah. That when Christ is born, he is the king.
Yeah, and you have that. You have again, like you mentioned, that again the warfare language of the hand upon the neck of the enemies, but here too this ending scene, where what happens in verse 10 leads into verse 11 and 12, right? What's the result? Binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Of course, hopefully our listeners are right away hearing the word donkey and not thinking that is accidental. The fact that the donkey is very much this royal beast of burden. We find this in Zechariah chapter 9. Interesting, how that plays out, because the donkey was also a significant symbol of wealth with the caravans that would traverse the ancient Near East and be able to bring great wealth and ore from the mines or all over. But here too, just the greatness of this king. Here's this donkey, but also the fact that he binds it to the vine. I mean, if you have grapes, and remember in Canaan, grapes are a pretty hot commodity. The wine industry in Canaan was well known throughout the Mediterranean. And yet here he is binding his donkey to the vine, where the grapes will be, there will be plenty of grapes. you can let him eat, and here is this picture of great, the great victory, of celebration and of success at the end of this conquest. Any thoughts on that?
No, that's beautiful, because then it fits into so much of the picture that we get of the Davidic king, and especially the kingdom as that prospered under Solomon, where he brings powerful rule. He has nations around him subject to him, and it's a time of peace and prosperity. And that's the time when the David has conquered his enemies, and then the son of David begins to build the house of God, both literally and metaphorically.
He almost embodies this kind of flourishing in verse 12. His eyes are darker than wine. I mean, normally if I saw somebody with eyes that color, I might be a little nervous that maybe they're having an ocular problem. But the wine and
it's a mark of beauty and handsomeness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and see how he embodies even the flowing of wine, the celebratory aspect, and the fecundity, the fatness, the milk. The fatness of the land is that great sign of blessing. And here in his person, we see this great new era, as it were, embodied.
It's interesting, though, just sort of an aside, Jacob gives his blessing to these sons. Joseph gets a rich blessing, and Judah does as well. But I think throughout the whole Joseph story, the Joseph narratives, what is emerging is not just the son that Jacob loved the most, Joseph, but the true royal son. Judah is the one who suggests some very horrible things to do to Joseph when he was shall we say, stopped and imprisoned and then sold by his brothers. But later on, it's Judah who offers himself, lest Benjamin be lost. Judah could not bear to see his father Jacob, go to his grave in horrific grief. And it's the speech of Judah that causes Joseph to break. And so later on, Judah will become a big and powerful tribe in the wilderness, and therefore it will occupy a huge portion of southern Canaan, and it's out of Judah that will come ultimately David.
We've seen the prophesied coming of Christ in Genesis and other early books of the Old Testament, but what about Isaiah and the prophets that we read of? Tune in next week to hear our Old Testament professor's insight on that. For more podcast episodes, you can find us on our website at midamerica.edu, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Be sure to search for and subscribe to Mid-America Reformed Seminary's Roundtable. I'm Jared Luchabor. Till next time.